Hi, I'm Ken Heyman. As Managing Director of the Advisor Institute at AllianceBernstein, I meet with financial advisors every day. One thing I hear expressed over and over is their frustration with how much they are juggling. The advisors I talk to are constantly trying to balance competing priorities, from managing client relationships to prospecting for new business, and of course, the tasks of leading their team. This problem of juggling is why we created the AllianceBernstein Digital Coach. This is a proprietary tool that draws on the wisdom of behavioral economics and unique perspectives from the Advisor Institute's practice management experts. In less than 10 minutes with the Digital Coach, you will be able to identify and prioritize the top needs of your practice. And armed with those insights, you will be well on your way to tackling the challenge of limited resources while positioning your business to seize opportunities for growth. Let the Digital Coach guide your journey to success. Visit abfunds.com/go/digital coach. That's abfunds.com/go/digital coach.
Welcome to Secrets of Successful Advisors with Ken Heyman, the podcast where we dive deep into the habits, mindsets, and strategies that set top financial advisors apart. I'm Scott Tatum, and today I'll be talking with Ken to explore his thoughts on why advisors struggle to talk to next generation clients. Before we begin, I'd like to draw your attention to an important service from our sponsor, Total Family. If you are working with ultra high net worth clients and find yourself stuck when it comes to motivation of those clients to engage you on legacy planning, I encourage you to go visit Total Family. You can do that at totalfamily.io. That's totalfamily.io. I think you will find this service really helpful. Ken, let's get our listeners in the right frame of mind. You cannot delve deeply into the psyche of clients while dwelling in your busy world. So let's leave that outside world behind for 25 minutes and look deep inside human behavior to explore the science of clients, setting instincts aside so that insights can guide. And Ken, we're going to let those insights guide into a topic today that makes advisors as uncomfortable as anything else we engage with them on. And that is dealing with the next generation, the children of their best clients. And, Ken, my observation when I'm talking to advisors is this makes them so acutely uncomfortable that the strategy of many of our listeners is I'm just going to kind of let this thing play out and I hope to sell the practice before this problem really manifests. That is not a great strategy, is it?
Well, obviously it's not, but I think you are pointing to something that we really need to take a closer look at. The advisors that we talk to really are in two camps. One camp is, I brought in my son or my daughter, they relate well to the next gen, and I'll just send them off to talk to those folks. Or, I'm not really too concerned about it. My clients aren't that old yet, or, I don't think the critical mass is there. I don't think this is an issue for me. And it's interesting when you look at the research and the experiences people have. I was watching a video the other day from someone who does a fair amount of research in this, and the person who recorded the video, was describing her experience of her father growing up. Her father had an advisor. Her father was very close to his advisor, very satisfied with the advisor's services. She knew the advisor at a distance, didn't know him personally. She's a grown woman now. Her father retires from his business, liquidates the business, has some pretty substantial wealth that transitions down to her. And a couple of years after retirement, he's diagnosed with this aggressive form of cancer and is now going to succumb. And she says in the video, this very elegantly stated, she said, the first time his advisor reached out to me was about 6 months before he died, when it was clear he was going to die, and introduced himself and said, I'm here to help through this process. And of course, the father died. And a few months after that, she transitioned all of this wealth to another advisor who she had built a relationship with. Now, look, that is an anecdote. And advisors look at that and say, well, I hear them say, we do a pretty good job with our next gen. We have this junior person, but the advisor themselves is the senior advisor or the drivers of the business are somewhat detached from it. And I think that there's some reasons for that we can explore. But the concern I have right now is this. If you look at demographics, the baby boomers make up the bulk of most advisors' core clients. The top 10 or 15 clients that generate most of your revenue are baby boomer clients. The oldest baby boomer turned 80 this year. Over the next 7 years, the number of baby boomers dying, the normal mortality charts reveal that in the next 7 or 8 years, about 30% of baby boomers will pass away. And in a lot of cases, because of modern healthcare, you're not going to get 2 or 3 or 4 years of warning. This is going to happen kind of randomly through your practice. In 15 years, more than half of them will be gone. And so this means that this big wealth transfer that we've been talking about that's been coming in drips and drabs is now going to accelerate dramatically. We're going to peak in about 3 years with 3 million baby boomers a year passing away. This is a huge, unprecedented change. And that means that if the impact of baby boomers passing is the wealth is going to transfer, then managing the wealth transfer is significant. And you have to remember there's two groups here. There's the baby boomer who's engaged with the client. And as this video revealed, then there's the next gen or the Gen Xer who's not engaged with the client. That group is 56 million. They started turning 60 in 2025. So these people are all of age. They all have their own money. They've been getting gifts downstream. The high net worth process is unfolding. And yet, when we look at the statistics, the advisor sees these as actively involved in the practice in some way. When research is done, it's like 40% of them are actively involved in the practice. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to stay with the advisor, but at least they're actively involved. But the majority are not even actively involved. And certainly when you get down to the next generation below, the grandkids, not involved at all. When we look at the statistics, Capgemini published this last year in 2025, they looked at 1,000 individuals who are planning to inherit. These are not people who inherited and then took an action. They're planning to inherit, and they're saying, we already know we're not going to work with our parents' advisor. That's 80% already know. And of course, advisors who are listening to me say, well, but we do really, my kid's on it and they relate well to this next generation client. I'm not sure that relating well translates into they have earned the respect and admiration and trust and confidence of this group. It means that they're being polite and engaged, and there may be some engagement. And again, 20% may stay. But here's the thing, Scott. When I talk to advisors who have bought practices from other advisors who've retired, remember, they bought a practice that's primarily baby boomer assets. Or when I talk to advisors who are thinking about buying a practice, I ask them, and this is, by the way, across the board, I've never had an exception when I ask this question of all the people I've asked it to, and I work with hundreds. How much regretted attrition are you anticipating in your business model from this wealth transfer that if you bought the practice or you're thinking about buying the practice is going to be the next 10 or 15 years of your practice? How much regretted attrition are you writing in? What's the percentage? That's part of your thoughtful diligence and awareness, your hardcore, good, solid decision-making process. Baby boomers are turning 80, kids are turning 60. Most of them are not deeply engaged with the practice. How much are you writing in? And the consistent, universal, no exception number, Scott, is 0%. We anticipate no regretted attrition in this wealth transfer process. And I look at that and I say, that is somebody who's got an emotional reaction. That's an advisor who has an emotional reaction to this and is in denial about what the process is. Now, I have no doubt that a lot of people listening right now are saying, no, I'm taking action. I'm doing all the things I can do in this regard. I want to have us have a conversation as an advocate for all of the advisors we work with, that this is probably an area that deserves more attention. And it's an area that's really difficult for advisors to pay attention to.
So let's go there next, because Ken, I've learned something, at least something from you over 20 years. And one of the things I've learned from you is that when advisors' actions are working counter to their own self interest, there's always a reason for it, right? It's not inattention. So, what makes advisors, the senior advisor, so reluctant to engage the next generation?
Well, it's actually a great conversation because it's a complicated answer. And that's almost always the case in difficult business strategies. It's complicated. This isn't easy and it's not self evident. And we have to remember, look, that the human brain operates in two channels. And I think anyone who's following the podcast at all is familiar with Kahneman's thoughts about system one, system two. System two is the cognition, the logic, the mathematics, the practical, logical decision making, kind of the deep, thoughtful, going to figure this out and do the right thing. System one operates on a different channel. It's more about emotion. It's more about immediacy. It's more about survival. Well, let's take a look at the life of the advisor and let's look at why working with Next Gen, in spite of the fact that they have proximity to them, in spite of the fact that they have every interest in the world in building a dynamic relationship with them, most advisors don't. And the statistics are really clear, really overwhelming. They just aren't building a vital and dynamic relationship. Well, you have to go back to the earliest days of when advisors built their business. Now, this isn't as true for the generation coming in now that are coming in as junior partners and kind of working their way up and they get a salary and they can live on this. For the advisors that built these businesses in the early days, the 80s and the 90s, when things were just getting built out, they had to take the full risk of building the business. And the biggest challenge and greatest pain of that experience was having to take all these actions, whether it was cold call, cold walking, direct marketing, networking, joining groups and waiting and hoping, whatever it was you did, there was all these actions, all these possibilities, all these opportunities that you were going after all the time. And you were doing it fast and you were doing it hard because you didn't have any income and you had to build this thing and you were hungry and you were stressed and your family was stressed. If advisors recall this, if we call back to this, this was an exciting time, but it was also a painful time. And the biggest pain was you never knew what action was going to pay off. So you did. And then, one of your colleagues, junior colleagues, they couldn't make it and they left you a few clients and maybe you had a walk-in that was a client and yet went to a party and it was an accidental encounter. Next thing you know, you're building a business. You're still taking lots of actions. They're still not translating direct action to result. And then you get enough of a practice that doing those actions that were painful and challenging and effortful and maybe involved some rejection, you finally said, just don't want to do it anymore. I have enough clients. Occasionally I get a referral from a client and you build your business and you stop doing those actions. For most advisors, and I mean this, the vast majority of advisors who built those businesses, who built big businesses, it's been years since they were willing to go out and do haphazard actions that were statistically likely to result in something, but were in fact, in the moment, unlikely to result in anything. This is virtually bordering on a trauma for some people. They have a phobic reaction to it. So, are you going to go meet with these next generation clients when the timeline for a result from that conversation is off into the future? I'll go back to this story from this video. This woman says, the first time I met my father's advisor was 6 months before he died. He had an aggressive form of cancer. We knew 3 years before that he had a short time horizon. It wasn't a matter of weeks, but it was certainly a short time horizon. And the advisor didn't reach out until 6 months before. Why? Because now it made emotional sense for him to reach out to this woman. Now the death of this man was obvious to him, and now the likelihood of a result was significant. And so now you have this threshold is reached, the individual crosses that and says, well, this is likely to be a good thing. It's a necessary thing. It's a must thing for me to do. I don't want to lose those assets. But the time when the trust should have been built, because trust takes time, was not when he got sick. It was before he got sick, when this woman was coming of age and making decisions about herself, because she has pride of self-determination. She has pride of her autonomy. She has pride of her independence. So starting to make those connections and meeting and relating to her on her own terms and getting to know her as a unique individual. That's how you build trust. But why didn't he do it? Because it was going to be years before those actions were going to pay off. Now, in the 11th hour, or as she's departing with those assets, the advisor can look back and say, oh, I really should have. But advisors don't do what they should do. Advisors do what they must do that was going to generate immediate results. And if your mindset is so collapsed, as many advisors are, that you can't see the long-term picture and that everything has to be an immediate return, what's going to become important is that going home Friday afternoon a little bit early and taking a break, or taking that Wednesday afternoon off for a round of golf. And do not hear me criticizing self-care. I'm not. But what happens is these things just sit in the practice and sit there and nothing is done, and they degrade in terms of likelihood. The last reason for this, and this, as I said, it's complicated. So now let's say the advisor's sitting here with me right now on the podcast, listening to this saying, you're right. I've got a bunch of folks that are aging. I've got a bunch of potential regretted attrition. Replacing clients is hard. Keeping clients is challenging, but replacing clients is really hard. I need to do something. And the next thing they're going to run into is, okay, what am I going to do? All right, I need to do something. First question, how do I raise the issue with my baby boomer clients? How do I go to them and say, okay, we've never talked about this before, but hey, how about an introduction to your kids? What's the reason for the conversation? And now the advisor backs up and goes, oh, I don't even know how to introduce that. I don't even know how to bring it up. And then if I do bring it up, if I say, hey, I'd like to get to know your kids, I think that might be a good idea. And the clients are like, yeah, it absolutely would be a good idea. They could use some education from you. And you sit down with the kids. What are you going to talk about? The kids are different than the parents. A lot of advisors, they say, well, I hired my kid because they understands these millennials and these Gen Xers. Okay, but the millennial and the Gen Xer know that this is your kid, not their primary advisor. This is not an expert who's got things well in hand. This is a beginner. The entire mindset around this thing is, it's not soon enough for me. I don't want to take actions that don't yield immediate results. But even then, when I realize I need to take an action, I don't actually know what to do. These are issues advisors need to look at. And obviously at the Advisor Institute, we intend to provide guidance for that. But this is why, it's a big part of the reason why advisors aren't talking to their clients about the next gen. And it's going to continue to allow this sense of 80% within a year of mom and dad passing away are going to go off in a different direction or spend the money. 80% regretted attrition in a world where advisors are telling me they don't anticipate any regretted attrition at all. And in fact, they've built a business model where they're leveraging that, and it's going to have an 80% impact. This is something advisors, I think, really need to have that system one alarm attached to at this point.
Well, Ken, you danced around the last relationship that I need you to address, directly, because we are a couple of boomers with adult children that have launched, and we need to talk about that relationship, right? Because for the advisor to be comfortable talking to their clients about this, they need to understand the psychology that the parent has with the children around money. And, boomer parents often feel kind of caught, right? Having discussions around that. So can you unpack that for our listeners?
Well, I can. And I think the reason to unpack it is the same reason that we should talk about the advisor's trauma, the advisor's reluctance, the advisor's ambivalence, the advisor's lack of strategy. It's not just to raise an alarm and say, hey, everybody, this is a crisis. It's because there are solutions to this. There are resources you can bring to bear on it. But increasingly, my concern is that advisors aren't embracing resources. Advisors aren't climbing learning curves, because they don't think there's a solution to the problem. And so rather than trying to solve it without the knowledge, they're kind of despairing. And that's what erects the defenses of denial and avoidance and all that sort of thing. I really want us to take these issues seriously because, as you point out, the parents have a problem here too. If a baby boomer couple comes to their advisor and says, hey, our kids are coming of age. They both graduated from college. They're both in their careers. We want to sit down with them and start talking actively about investing and financial planning and stewardship. There is not an advisor practicing who wouldn't look at that and say, I'm on it, let's do it. If they didn't know exactly how to have that conversation, they'd go out and read a book, they'd go to their firm and get some resources. They would be on it if the parents bring it up, but the parents don't. Why is that? Well, in most families, the muscles of engagement and conversation and values clarification and conflict resolution are poorly exercised or may not be exercised at all. Mom and dad have grown up and run the business, have sold the business. The kids see all this money. One of the things that happened along the way is mom and dad grew up almost always in more challenging circumstances, and that's what drove them to become successful. The kids grew up in more comfortable circumstances, and the kids learned that money equals happiness. Having money and getting things and doing things is happiness. The kids, the Gen Xers and the millennials, they are highly oriented toward high quality experiences that cost money. And in many ways, if you look at the parents' behavior in the baby boomer generation, as they built that business or as they were really busy in their professions and they were generating all this wealth, they felt somewhat guilty about how much time they were taking away from the kids. And as the kids got older, the vacations got nicer and the things got nicer. And the parents inadvertently contributed to the kids' development of an alternative value system. Let's look at the alternative value systems. The parents, the baby boomers, those great clients of every advisor out there that make up the 10 or 12 or 15 relationships that pay all the bills, they're builders, they're savers, they're risk takers, they're courageous, but they're building something. They're not thinking about consumption. In fact, when they end up selling the business, a lot of them get locked down and say, I don't know what to do here. I've played enough golf, and when you go fishing every day, every fish starts to look the same. These are actual reflections from people that had that success track, and now they're kind of rambling about and they don't know what to do, but they know their value system of building, creating, saving, investing, grappling. The meaning of their life was something that was bigger than them. It was engaged with other people and there was an excitement about it. Their kids have none of that. The kids are waiting for the money so they can have experiences. And this is a really interesting challenge because where you have this values breakdown, now, mom and dad have a trouble time communicating with the kids because they know their values are different. They'd like to invite the kids toward their values of creation and management, but the kids are clearly in a different direction. The kids are waiting to get the money that's been their birthright since they were little. I remember talking with one of my advisor colleagues years ago. He is a self-made multimillionaire. And he said to me one day, he said, Ken, I think my daughters think that my money is their money. And I said, absolutely, Johnny. They do think your money is their money because you told them that. You never have to worry. There's always going to be this support for you. What a heck of a thing to do. And then they're in their 30s and you wonder why they're not successful. Look, here's the fundamental issue for parents, for the baby boomers. There's 4 places they can go with this money. They can spend it, except that's not their tendency.
Not their jam.
Yeah,
no,
they want to build
do.
something. They want to invest something. They're very concerned about stewardship and what this money means. Well, you can let the money go to taxes. Well, think about this. Those baby boomers who built businesses or had great careers, the biggest hurdle to their financial success every year was taxes. They hate taxes. To the extent possible, they're not going to allow that money to go to taxes. They're going to create strategies. And advisors, by the way, advisors better become aware of this as the modern era unfolds. And if you're not aware of this, Alliance Bernstein and Advisor Institute can help you become more aware of it. There are strategies that allow you to be very sensitive to taxes and really effective with taxes. It's something that needs to be embraced because these people want that. So they don't want it to go to taxes. They don't want to spend it. They do some philanthropy, but it doesn't have any meaning to them. It's not like the philanthropy is the center of their life, and it's not allowing them to engage with other people around something bigger than themselves. It's like, well, I wrote a check and that feels good. But the last place it can go is family transfer. Well, here's the problem. If we think about transferring the wealth to the kids, if you ask most baby boomers who have grown children, you say, what's the one thing you don't want the kids to do with the money when you transfer it to them? They're going to say, I don't want them to buy a fancy car. And yet, if you look at the statistics, the most common thing to be done with inherited wealth, and it's usually executed within 17 days of inheriting wealth, is the purchase of a high-end automobile that gratifies the kid's sense of that. So the one thing the parents don't want is the one thing the kids are going to be inclined to do. So here's the thing. The parents are all about the meaning of the money. They're all about stewardship. And what they know is when I transfer this wealth downstream, whether it's during my lifetime or at the end of my lifetime, what this money is going to mean, what my life's work is going to end up meaning is my kids get to live in a really nice house and have really nice cars and go on really nice vacations. And as much as an advisor may weigh in and try to help these kids think about growth and stewardship and responsible management of the family's wealth and ultimate legacy, unless the parents and the kids have come to some clarity, have developed a shared sense of values, unless they have exercised the muscle of communication, have exercised the muscle of values clarification and some conflict management, unless the family, the baby boomers and the kids and the grandkids have all come together into a shared vision of what we want this money to be doing, what this money means, not just for us in the immediate, but over across generations. Unless that happens, and the values of the baby boomers and the values of the kids kind of synthesize into a vision of what we want this money to be doing, and the kids start owning the long-term vision of the money, the parents are kind of stuck. And they know they should do something, but they don't know what to do. And here's where I think we end this conversation. Advisors need to learn how to approach the parents and the kids with a vital process that they can participate in and support and kind of enliven with these clients so that the kids see the advisor as a dynamic part of the process they're participating and leading. The parents need to be engaged and invited into values clarification in these conversations. The advisor needs to be a dynamic part of that. And here's the thing. What that means then is the advisor at least has the likelihood that they'll stay connected to the wealth because the wealth is now connected to a vision rather than to the kids. And the vision is designed to last across multiple generations. And now the practice can be a part of that multiple generation vision. But here's the ultimate kicker in all of this, Scott. When the advisor starts doing this, the baby boomer clients in their practice that are the vital everyday conversations they're having have friends, lots of friends who have the same problem with their kids. People who have wealth tend to gravitate toward others with wealth. People who have wealth have these problems. The other friends, advisors, aren't talking to them about this. They don't know how, and they don't think it's time yet. And now the advisor who's on this creates an experience for the parents. The parents have an amazing experience of relief and creative engagement, an experience they've never had before, but the advisor was responsible for it. And guess what? They start to refer. This is something we're going to talk about more at the Advisor Institute going forward, but these are the things that we need advisors to start becoming cognizant of so that all of the resources we're standing up at AB will make sense and become part of that toolbox of vital connection you have with these very important clients. Scott, I think you've raised some really important questions today, and I hope this has taken us to a place where folks start to think, okay, where can we lean in here? What can we do about this?
Ken, this was just a wonderful exploration of what makes this topic so difficult for advisors. And if we didn't cover this on this podcast, I don't think the resources that are coming would fully be appreciated. Hey, look, as our listeners return to the busy world of running their practices, I really want to remind you that we want to fan source future topics for this podcast. So if you've got ideas, just think about what you're thinking about in your practice and go to my LinkedIn page or go to Ken's LinkedIn page and just message us and say, hey, we'd love to have a podcast on this. And if we use that idea, we're going to give you a shout out. That's a wrap for this edition of Secrets of Successful Advisors with Ken Heyman, the podcast where we explore the science of clients, setting instincts aside so that insights can guide.